To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression. And with all this, yet to die.
There is a very real reason why it's so hard for many of us to accept that what happened to Jay Slater was a silly mistake, an accident. We don't like to believe the tightrope walk between life and death can be decided by a mishap that has seemingly nothing to do with us.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it is not only possible to die, always, constantly, everywhere. It's possible to die in ways that very much are an insult to all we've become. Because we do emerge from nothing, and yet with all this, yet to die. My best friend died recently in precisely this way. In a way that was an absolute insult to him, in a way that still doesn't seem real to me. It was an insult to him, to his humanity, to all of his towering achievements. We are gods, not primitives, right? Aren't we? What happened to Jay turns that unexpectedly, shockingly on its head. You have a youngster on top of the world, jet-setting, partying, almost omnipotent in his capacity over the world. He can fly over there, he can meet all sorts of people, and he's just starting to test his own power and sort of eminence over the world. And he kind of has the world at his feet, only to have that world slip under his feet and to be engulfed by that world. For him to plunge down besides this rock face that seems benign, and suddenly it's not. It's hard. It has hard edges. It's merciless, and you can be broken by those hard edges. And so it turns out a young man may not have the world at his feet. The world may have a young man die and decay. I'm talking about the natural world in one of its shadowy basements, unseen, and worse, despite our efforts to find him, using all our technology, using flying machines in all shapes and sizes, despite all our strategies, all our ideas, we are all defeated again in our attempts to make sense of the world. It adds insult to injury. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, worth thinking about, if it resonates with you, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, I want you to know that being in denial about the existential terror that Jay ought to have been in himself. I'm talking about when he started crossing this ravine, and there were these vertiginous spaces, empty spaces, these gaping sort of black spaces below him. This air, footless halls of air. He was in a kind of denial, right? He ought to have been in a kind of terror that I don't know where I'm going. I'm getting myself into deep and deeper trouble. I almost slipped here, I almost slipped there. I could die. The fact that he wasn't in this existential terror is a kind of denial. And guess what? We are in the same kind of denial. And it is entirely understandable that we are. It's not rational, right? It's not rational to not think about being in a situation like that, what could go wrong, what could happen, right? But it is reasonable in a way that you don't think about it, because that can actually make things even worse. But at the same time, it's a flaw in our design. It's a flaw in our programming as human beings that we believe ourselves to be smarter and stronger than we really are. In fact, there is a measured link between ignorance and confidence. And that confidence is even higher than in people who know exactly what they're dealing with. Their confidence is even lower than people who are completely ignorant. It's a real flaw in our programming. And I think part of this belief that we think we are smarter and stronger than we really are, part of this is to do with narcissism. Narcissism actually helps us to cope with the world, actually helps us to function instead of cower in terror from the possibilities that constantly circle and overshadow us. When soldiers go into battle, it's narcissism that makes one believe the person on my left and right might be a victim of enemy fire, but I won't be. And so we make mistakes all the time and get away with them all the time. Off the top of my head, I can think of around half a dozen scrapes that I really ought not to have survived, but I did. Can you think of any? If you scratch your head, can you remember something that you probably were very lucky to have survived? Well, imagine if you didn't. Imagine if you thought about that for too long. I mean, I know I survived these, and soon after, obviously, amnesia sets in again. But some aren't so lucky.
People across the nation have been following this case in part because of how unusual Caleb's disappearance was. The 21-year-old Texas A&M Corpus Christi student was last seen on surveillance video right here, walking a dog with his roommates around 1 a.m. on March 4th. Loved ones say he Snapchatted his sister and a friend just after 3 as he was walking near the complex, but the barefoot college student vanished by dawn. In June, city workers discovered human remains at in a wastewater well less than a mile from where Caleb was last seen. An advanced state of decomposition made it impossible for the local medical examiner to identify the remains, so they were sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification along with DNA samples from Caleb's parents. The results came back as a likely match.
That is a case, Caleb Harris. He disappeared on March 4th, and his remains have only just been found 3 months later, right? And in this case, it's a 21-year-old, also someone who disappeared late at night. He ordered Uber Eats, and so the Uber Eats driver became a prime suspect. It was actually a female, I think, that dropped off the Uber Eats. Of course, there's no sign of struggle or foul play, according to the police, but basically the same situation. Someone disappears mysteriously. No one can believe what happened. No one can find him. No one can begin to know what's going on. And guess what happened? Looks like he fell into a drainage ditch within 100 feet of his apartment complex. Just like with Jay Slater, Harris's phone last shared location data with the nearest cell tower at 3:12 a.m. And so again, what do you think happened to Caleb? Foul play, or did he fall into a ditch or a river late at night? And make no mistake, if you aren't able to deal with reality, and these are cases of other people's reality, are you able to figure out what happened here? And if the answer is no, then that has implications on your life in terms of how you deal with situations you find yourself in. Just during this road trip to Cape Town, a couple of days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, 3 of us decided to leave the tar road and head up a pass, despite it being clear that the fuel gauge was giving us a range that was going to make this endeavor tight. And I actually asked the people around me to vote. We voted, is it worth doing it? It does look like it's going to be touch and go. It's going to be very close. And all 3 of us voted to do it, to go for it. And so while we were on the dirt road off the tar road, very quickly after we left the tar road, we lost signal, and we didn't expect that. But when that happened, we didn't say, okay, to be safe, let's turn around. We persisted. And shortly after descending the Fantonda Pass, the fuel gauge suddenly shed its range at an alarming rate. Suddenly the fuel gauge changed the numbers it was giving us. And it was looking really likely that we were going to be stranded in the wilderness ourselves. In the end, we made it back with less than 3 liters in the gas tank. We could just as easily have gotten ourselves into fairly serious trouble. But we didn't. And so you don't really think about that. And so you might do that again. And you might justifiably ask, how could you be so stupid? Well, people do stupid things all the time and get away with them. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they learn from them, and sometimes they don't. The hubris surrounding the J. Slater case strikes me as very naive. And this idea that nature is limited, nature is completely known, nature is controlled. And so the only way something could have happened to Jay is if somebody else intentionally did something to him. That basically turns nature into this wuss, this weak force, and people into this overpowering, potent force striding over the countryside like supermen. During a few days spent in Cape Town, everywhere we went, construction crews seemed to be trying to shore up the coast, trying to hold the coastline together. Roads had been washed away. Entire beaches seemed to have been eroded away during a brief holocaust of storms. Everywhere they're trying to just hold the tar and the sidewalks and people's homes and the coastline together. Now, if land can be lost so easily, with so much riding on it, homes, lives, whole systems, how arrogant are we to imagine that we as individuals are somehow immune from being weathered ourselves, battered ourselves, bruised ourselves, surprised by the very real trials and challenges presented by inconstant real life. But I think we think like primitives. We keep defaulting to our animal programming, our tribal settings, and we get our sense of who we are, and not just that immortality, power beyond ourselves by belonging to a group. You see that constantly on YouTube. I want to be part of this group. We saw groups emerge in this case that were anti-Spanish, pro-British, and let's just say anti-reality as well. It feels good you belong to a group. Since King Alfred invented the idea of democracy, where multiple tribes aligned under a common goal, a common language, a common kind of belief system, civilization got its start. But today it seems we want to cling back to our animal identities. Where that takes us isn't away from the natural world, it propels us even further into it, but like lambs to the slaughter.
Someone has to die in order that the rest of us should value life more. It's contrast.
In the real world, what do we learn when someone like Jay dies? Well, we ought to learn the same lesson, do we? If not, why don't we? Well, I think because it adds insult to injury. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.